The highlands of central Mexico once echoed with the sound of drums, flutes, and chants rising to the gods. Beneath the blazing sun, thousands gathered at the foot of towering pyramids. Priests in elaborate feathered headdresses lifted obsidian blades, while captives, warriors, nobles, sometimes even children, were laid upon stone altars. Blood traced the temple steps in dark, gleaming lines, staining the heart of the Aztec capital, Tenochtitlan. To their people, these sacrifices were not cruelty, but necessity, the lifeblood that sustained the universe. For the Aztecs believed that without constant offerings, the sun itself would die, plunging the world into darkness. In their eyes, human sacrifice was the sacred duty that kept creation alive. Yet to outsiders, the scale of Aztec rituals was beyond comprehension. Chroniclers spoke of tens of thousands of victims in a single festival. Spanish conquistadors, arriving in 1519, recoiled in horror as they entered temples lined with skull racks, where the bleached remains of the dead stared eternally toward the heavens. But was this merely barbarism, or something deeper? Archaeology and history reveal a civilization of dazzling brilliance and terrifying devotion. The Aztecs built one of the greatest cities on Earth, mastered agriculture in hostile landscapes, and created a culture both beautiful and brutal. Their story is not only one of conquest and glory, but also of shadows, where faith demanded blood and where empire was sustained by sacrifice. And in uncovering these truths, we must confront a haunting question. How could a civilization so advanced build its greatness on foundations of death? Because the truth about the Aztecs is much darker than we were ever told. The Aztecs, or Mexica as they called themselves, were not the first great power of Mesoamerica. By the time they arrived in the Valley of Mexico in the 13th century, mighty civilizations like Teotihuacan and the Toltecs had already risen and collapsed, leaving behind ruins that whispered of lost glory. The Mexica were latecomers, migrant warriors with little status, forced to serve stronger city-states. The early years of the Mexica were marked by hardship and humiliation. When they first settled in the valley, they were despised by established city-states. With no land of their own, they survived only by serving as mercenaries for more powerful rulers like those of Culhuacan. Chroniclers recount that they lived off snakes, insects, and the meager harvests of the marshy islands. To their neighbors, they were little more than ragged nomads, tolerated only as expendable warriors. Yet adversity shaped their destiny. Their god, Huitzilopochtli, was not a gentle deity of harvests or rain. He was the god of war, the sun, and sacrifice. Priests told how he himself had been born in violence, slaying his siblings to ensure the sun's triumph. This myth burned into the Mexica consciousness. Survival could be won only through blood and resilience. Legend says they wandered for decades, guided by visions from this god. The prophecy was clear. They must settle where they saw an eagle perched on a cactus, devouring a serpent. In 1325, on a swampy island in Lake Texcoco, they found that sacred sign. There they laid the first stones of Tenochtitlan, what would become one of the greatest cities in the world. At first, the Mexica were mocked by their neighbors. They had no land, no wealth, and no noble lineage. But Through cunning alliances and relentless warfare, they began to rise. Their warriors were feared for their ferocity and their absolute devotion to their gods. Captives taken in battle were not just spoils of war, they were offerings, destined for the altars of Tenochtitlan. By the mid-15th century, under the leadership of Itzcoatl and later Montezuma I, the Aztecs forged the Triple Alliance with Texcoco and Tlacopan. This political and military pact transformed them from a minor tribe into the dominant power of central Mexico. Through conquest, tribute, and intimidation, their empire expanded across mountains, valleys, and jungles, ruling over an estimated 8 to 12 million people. Tenochtitlan grew into a city of wonders, with causeways stretching across the lake, bustling markets, and pyramids that seemed to scrape the sky. The Mexica had turned a swamp into a capital of stone and gold. But behind every victory, behind every tribute shipment of maize, jade, or cacao, there was something darker. For the Aztecs believed that their expansion was not merely political, it was sacred. War was the flowery death, and captives were the currency of survival. Each conquest meant not just territory, but fuel for the gods. The rise of the Aztecs was unstoppable, but with every step upward, they built their empire on a foundation that demanded more blood, more conquest, and more sacrifice. And this unstoppable rise would set the stage for their greatest glory and their darkest truths. By the early 16th century, the Aztec Empire stood as the undisputed power of Mesoamerica. At its height, it controlled vast territory from the Gulf Coast to the Pacific. Tenochtitlan, their capital, was a city unlike any the world had seen. When Hernán Cortés first arrived in 1519, he described it as the most magnificent thing in the world, greater even than many European capitals. Built upon a series of islands in Lake Texcoco, the city gleamed with whitewashed temples, palaces, and canals. Broad causeways connected it to the mainland, while bustling markets, such as the famed Tlatelolco Market, welcomed tens of thousands of traders on peak days, according to Spanish accounts. There, goods from every corner of the empire could be found: cacao from the south, turquoise from the north, cotton, feathers, obsidian, and gold. Cacao beans often functioned as currency, used to purchase food, clothing, and books, and even bonded laborers, Tlacotin. At the heart of Tenochtitlan rose the Templo Mayor, a twin pyramid dedicated to Huitzilopochtli, god of war and the sun, and Tlaloc, god of rain and fertility. Here, ritual and politics fused into one. The emperor, or Huaytlatoani, presided not only as a ruler, but as a divine representative, mediating between mortals and the gods. Nearby stood the Huitzilopochtli, skull towers that fused piety with power. To visitors, devotion and dominion were inseparable in this sacred precinct. Aztec brilliance extended beyond temples and palaces. Their society had an organized education system unique in the Americas. Boys of common birth attended the Telpacali, where they learned warfare, agriculture, and discipline. Sons of nobles studied at the Calmecac, mastering astronomy, theology, and the sacred histories that legitimized Aztec rule. Even girls were educated in crafts, midwifery, and household management. Every child, noble or commoner, grew up steeped in duty to empire and gods. Aztec culture flourished in art, poetry, and science. Their astronomers charted the heavens with astonishing accuracy, creating calendars that guided both planting and ritual. Their artisans produced masks of turquoise, obsidian knives inlaid with gold, and feathered capes of breathtaking beauty. Warriors were immortalized in colorful codices, while nobles sponsored elaborate ceremonies filled with music, dance, and featherwork more vibrant than any European tapestry. Everyday life reflected this richness. In the markets, one could hear the cries of vendors selling maize, chiles, beans, and tamales, alongside luxuries like jade ornaments and tropical bird feathers. Nobles dined on turkey, chocolate drinks, and delicacies flavored with vanilla. Commoners enjoyed maize tortillas and stews, sustaining the empire's workforce. But the true measure of Aztec power lay in their armies. Elite warrior societies, the Jaguar Knights and Eagle Knights, fought not just for conquest, but for captives, essential for the great festivals. Victories were celebrated with parades, feasts, and processions, reinforcing the empire's glory in the eyes of its people and its gods. This was the zenith of Aztec civilization, a world of dazzling temples, mighty armies, vibrant markets, and a capital city that seemed to float upon water. To its citizens, it was the very center of the universe, the Axis Mundi, where the gods themselves demanded to be fed. Yet even in this radiant moment, shadows loomed, for the empire's brilliance was inseparable from its darkness. Its glory was built not only on trade and engineering, but also on an unyielding cycle of sacrifice. And it was here, at the very height of their triumph, that the darker side of the Aztecs would reveal itself most starkly. Behind the splendor of Tenochtitlan and the brilliance of Aztec culture lay a truth so grim that even their own allies feared it. The empire's lifeblood, quite literally, was sacrifice. The Aztecs believed that the gods had given their own blood to create the world, and humanity owed a debt that could only be repaid in kind. Without offerings, the sun would falter, the rains would cease, and the cosmos itself would collapse. This belief shaped every corner of their society. War was waged not to annihilate enemies, but to capture them alive. These flower wars pitted Aztec warriors against neighboring states in ritualized combat. Their primary goal, not victory on the battlefield, but bodies for the temples. For tributary states, war meant quotas, not only in maize and cotton, but in lives. Spanish chroniclers, horrified at what they saw, recorded accounts of entire festivals drenched in blood. The most infamous was the dedication of the Templo Mayor in 1487, under Emperor Ahuitzotl. Thousands, some chroniclers claimed tens of thousands, were sacrificed in a single ceremony, their bodies thrown down the steep pyramid steps, while priests moved on to the next victim. Many of the largest figures come from post-conquest chroniclers. Archaeology agrees sacrifice was central, while exact totals remain debated. The capital itself bore constant reminders of this cycle. The Tzompantli, or skull racks, displayed rows upon rows of human skulls bleaching in the sun, a stark message of both piety and power. Priests, clad in black and smeared with blood, fasted, scarred themselves, and carried obsidian knives sharpened for ritual. Even nobles and rulers took part in bloodletting, piercing their tongues or ears to spill drops as offerings. The rituals themselves were carefully choreographed, At dawn, drums thundered through the city. Captives, sometimes painted blue to symbolize sacrifice, were led up the steps of the pyramid. As the crowd chanted, 4 priests would pin the victims' limbs, while the high priest plunged an obsidian blade into the chest, raising the still beating heart toward the sun. The body was cast down the steps, stairways stained crimson as attendants carried the remains away. And then silence, save for the drums. Some captives were forced into gladiatorial combat, tethered to a stone platform with wooden weapons, fighting Aztec warriors until exhaustion brought their death. Children, too, were sacrificed to Tlaloc, god of rain, their tears believed to summon fertile storms. This system bred not only terror, but resentment. Conquered peoples, Tlaxcalans, Aztecs, Mixtecs, were compelled to send tribute and captives to Tenochtitlan. For them, Aztec rule was a nightmare. Every son taken in war, every daughter offered at the temple steps deepened their hatred. Even within the empire, cracks began to show. How much blood would ever be enough? Priests urged greater sacrifices. Emperors demanded more campaigns, and the cycle of conquest fed itself. Expansion was no longer only about land or tribute, but about sustaining the gods with fresh lives. Thus, the glory of the Aztecs was inseparable from its darkness. Their civilization shone brilliantly, but the price was terror, resentment, and rivers of blood. And as history would soon show, it was this very darkness that opened the door to their downfall. In 1519, the Aztec Empire stood at its height, millions under its rule, Tenochtitlan, one of the largest cities on Earth. Yet that same year, Hernán Cortés arrived with barely 600 Spaniards. By force of arms alone, they should have been crushed. But the empire's greatest weakness lay within: resentment. Subject peoples, long bled by tribute and sacrifice, turned eagerly to the Spaniards. Swelling their numbers into tens of thousands, Emperor Moctezuma II tried diplomacy, sending gifts of gold to appease what he feared might be divine envoys. Instead, the Spaniards' hunger grew. By November 1519, Cortés was inside Tenochtitlan itself, marveling at its grandeur while plotting its fall. The fragile peace broke the following year. During the festival of Topscatl in 1520, Spanish soldiers massacred unarmed nobles and priests inside the sacred precinct. The city convulsed in fury. Moctezuma was killed under uncertain circumstances, and the Spaniards fled into the night. Hundreds died in the lakes on La Noche Triste, the night of sorrows. For a moment, it seemed the Mexica had struck a decisive blow. But an invisible enemy soon turned the tide. Smallpox swept through central Mexico, killing tens of thousands, and even the new emperor, Cuitlahuac. Entire districts fell silent as warriors, nobles, and commoners alike perished. The empire's strength ebbed just as Cortés returned with a vast army of native allies. In 1521, the siege of Tenochtitlan began. For 93 days, the city resisted, fighting street by street, canal by canal. Hunger hollowed the markets, aqueducts were destroyed, and famine gripped the once mighty capital. At its heart stood Cuauhtémoc, the young emperor, rallying his people with desperate courage. But courage could not stop starvation, disease, and Spanish artillery. In August, the final assault came. The canals carried the wreckage of a dying city. Broken canoes, corpses, and shattered shields. Cuauhtémoc was captured alive as he tried to flee, dragged before Cortés in chains. The jewel of the Americas was reduced to rubble. Out of its ashes, the Spaniards built Mexico City, capital of a new world. The fall of the Aztecs was swift, violent, and final. Not only the triumph of Spanish steel and disease, but the collapse of an empire that had built its greatness on fear and sacrifice. Its brilliance and its darkness were inseparably bound, and in the end, both led to its destruction. Beneath the asphalt of modern Mexico City, excavations keep rewriting what we thought we knew. The ruins of Tenochtitlan still lie there, and the Templo Mayor has been unearthed stone by stone, revealing altars, sculptures, and offerings that speak of a vanished world. Much of what survives comes through colonial lenses, codices, friars' chronicles, and archaeology now in dialogue. Many of the practices once condemned as barbaric are now re-examined with nuance. Archaeologists and historians see the Aztecs not as monsters, but as a civilization grappling with cosmic fear, the terror that the universe itself might collapse without human devotion. Their sacrifices, shocking to us, were to them a sacred duty, woven into their understanding of life, death, and rebirth. Yet their cultural brilliance remains undeniable. The Nahuatl language continues to influence modern Spanish in Mexico. Words like chocolate, tomato, and coyote come directly from the Mexica. Their poetry, preserved in codices, still stirs with haunting beauty. Their agricultural innovations, especially the chinampas, are studied today as models of sustainable farming. Even the image of their founding prophecy endures: the eagle, cactus, and serpent, the very vision that led them to Tenochtitlan, form the center of Mexico's national flag, a symbol of resilience and rebirth. The Mexica may have been conquered, but they were never erased. And so, the Aztec legacy is one of paradox, a people of staggering achievement and terrifying devotion, who reached for eternity through both beauty and blood. Their story forces us to ask difficult questions. How far will human beings go in the name of faith? What price is too high for the promise of cosmic order? In the end, the Aztecs remind us that every empire, no matter how radiant, carries shadows within it. Their greatness was inseparable from their darkness, and their downfall a warning carved into history's stone, that no civilization, however mighty, can escape the consequences of the foundations upon which it is built. The Aztecs dreamed of eternity. Instead, they became a memory, one of the most haunting and enduring of all time.